Question.
All right, serious now.
Okay. Well, happy birthday.
Thank you.
It's such
I'm 32. Yes.
Oh, wow, you're younger than I am.
I'm in bad shape, though.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to actually have you here and be able to ask you some questions on your birthday.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wanted to start with the exhibition at Gagosian Books and Company. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't seen it. I'm going up for APAD in the auctions in April. I think it'll still be up then, so that was one of the things I wanted to go see.
So yeah, I wanted to ask you, I guess, about that period of time for bookmaking and self-publishing. You know, the 1960s, 1970s. Ed Ruscha's book, 26 Gasoline Stations, had been published in 1962. You know, how do you remember that time as an artist and photographer?
Well, there's one insight I'll give you. An old friend of mine who since passed away, Walter Hopps, who was a close friend of Ed Ruscha's, told me once, because I had all the books, sort of picked you could pick them up anywhere for nothing, and you couldn't give them away. But he said, Ed did these for the covers. The pictures were immaterial. He wanted to do the cover typography as a work of art, and then could put anything in it he wanted. So it was irrelevant to what was inside, and he was more surprised than anybody that people picked up on the pictures as being so important. So I always thought that was a real interesting insight. I think Ed has changed his mind about it since, but the books were done for the covers, for the typography, because they mirrored what he was doing with words in his paintings at the same time. Mm-hmm. But that kind of early books, there were early artist books around, and they were mostly as the art scene shifted to more and more conceptual art, a reaction against, quote, painting being dead, as it dies about every 15 years, as now I have a little longer look at the world. But it was very important to make artwork that wasn't, quote, saleable and existed in other forms. So there were these Richard Nonis books. Carl Andre did a wonderful book. Sol LeWitt did books. They were mostly artist books, sometimes including photography, sometimes. Vito Conchi's books would always be there. And it'd be very hard to find. I mean, like the books now, they were self-published or published by their gallery. They had no distribution. Nobody knew how to sell them. In D.C., there was a wonderful gallery, Max Protect Gallery. And Max was really interested in this stuff, and he had a little bookstore. Mm-hmm. I mean, if we could go back now, you want to make some money, buy all of the books in Max's gallery for their list price at the time, because they're all worth a fortune now. But he was a great source of it. You could go in, and nobody wanted them here. DC didn't have any idea about them. So I picked up things there, and since I came from New York, I picked up some things. But it would be just hit and miss. You'd never see them or anything. But it was pretty much the way into me to art that had more to do with thinking than looking, let's say. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's telling that most of the painters that I thought, like Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg, they never did books. The painters didn't feel them, Frank Stella and all those guys. And the photographers didn't really get into that same thing until the 70s. It was sort of early 70s. Typically, books about yay big, paperback, 35 millimeter, horizontals, one to a page or one to each page, and 90% of them really boring, badly printed. It was a badge of honor that it was badly printed, and then some exceptional things. Mm. So it was that was sort of how it drifted. It drifted out, as so many things in photography, it drifted out from the art world, the contemporary art world, and sort of photographers picked it up a few years later. Seriously, I don't know that many people as photographers. I know a few that were influenced by the Ruscha things early on. I know Louis Baltz was. I know Bill Eggleston was greatly. He loved the stuff. You look at Robert Adams and you would think, like in the New West, that he had some affinity. I don't think he actually did. I don't think he knew it until after the fact. having talked. I don't think I've ever directly asked Bob, but and again, a lot of stuff came out of visual studies workshop too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of the they were the publishing source, if you will, of more of this that wasn't quote totally independently done. That somebody raised a little money and printed 500 copies of something that they could sell 25 of. Echoes of today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's what I remember about that.
Yeah. Do you think DC would embrace, a bookstore with those kinds of books today?
The same books I would.
Well,
no, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
No, I mean let's put an ongoing store. DC is not a tremendously sophisticated art town for contemporary, the most contemporary. They're assuming books that are being published by living, interested people that aren't huge names yet. I mean, probably the only two cities that I could see really supporting that. I mean, one, New York, obviously, possibly LA. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a woman, Dagny Jans, who had a great bookstore in LA for years called Art Catalogs. It was only catalogs. But Dagny's father, Ed Jans, basically was the developer of Marina Del Rey, so I don't think she had to exactly pay the rent. But she was super about it. But she kept saying, nobody understands these things here. Mm-hmm. And I think DC just doesn't, you'd sell your 3 copies of things to somewhere among the 100 people who are interested, and then the rest would sit forever.
Mm-hmm. So, so in the last decade, there's been this explosion of photo book self-publishing and indie presses, what I consider kind of a second wave of self-publishing. Which
more than a second. I mean, it's like it was a 3-foot wave before, and it's now a 100-foot wave now. I think just by the volume of things that are done worldwide, and that we have access to. Well, the other thing too is you didn't have access to things done in Europe. Back to our first question. Mm-hmm. I mean, they really, really trickled. You hardly ever saw them. Now, I mean, you go on the internet, and all of us are getting books from virtually every country that has a viable photographic scene, and that's really changed. That's changed the sense of how much is going on.
Yeah. So, how do you make sense of it all? All the books that are being produced, and are there too many that are being done?
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, we should only do the good things. That's always been the idea, and everybody has unfortunately a different opinion of that. Mm-hmm. I mean, most of the things. I mean, I'm consistently dazzled about how well done a lot of things are now. They're either well designed, well printed, competently photographed. What the sort of trap is do you want to look at any of these things more than once? I mean, what my big thing, I have a lot of books, and enough that I don't need more books, just space-wise. Mm-hmm. A book that I look at once or twice, and I think, oh, that's really cool. It's whatever, and don't feel the need to look at again is not something I particularly want to own. I'd rather. I mean, one of the things we've given up is that we don't. I don't, at least, have a chance very often to look at books before I buy them or get them. It's internet. You look at a little book or a video of the book or something, but you can't. I used to go to bookstores and look through the book, and then sort of consider, well, could I afford $20 for a copy of whatever, New West or something? And I'd agonize over it because I didn't have $20, and I'd eventually go back. But I had a real experience of the book. Mm-hmm. By the time I went back to actually buy the book, I was really committed to that. I wanted to see it often. Mm-hmm. Now,
yeah. So, what's something that you recently purchased that you will look over again and again and again?
Well, there's actually a book today, which I know I will look at because I know there's a tremendous German photographer, Iver Lethoff, who has a new book called Postcards from Europe. And she's one of my favorite photographers, who I don't know. I've never met her. We've corresponded. I've traded books. And I just saw she had a new book of this tremendous work. And I emailed her, and she said, oh, we should trade. And, we're going to trade a book. But that's her work, I know. I mean, this is a photographer that does things in color with the graphic sense of Auger. Mm-hmm. And with a background, a political sense. This is all her projects are politically oriented. So it's a combination that's very odd in the history of photography. And the photographs are just terrific. They're almost too good for the purpose, the context she puts them in. Mm-hmm. I've told her about that. And she says, don't tell me these things. I don't want to be an artist. I want to deal with the issues that I want to deal with. And I said, yeah, I do. I want you to do it too. But...
So if you're looking at these books online, which sites do you use to find or to browse through? Well,
Facebook, things on Photobooks, which people recommend. I mean, it's nice to get a recommendation, too, of somebody who, even if you don't know them, have recommended other good books. Mm-hmm. So it's trying to find a leg up and not get a boring one. Not get the one you get in the mail and say, oh, well, I got it, it's okay. I wish I'd saved $45 on Amazon or something like that. Mm-hmm. I try to look at things that give me some idea of what the book is. I buy books from Photo and Amazon and, wherever they're directly from the maker if that's possible. Mm-hmm. There's so many, as you know, the kind of books that you do, these independently. A lot of things don't make it to these sites or make it to it 6 months or 8 months later, but you see it a good example of how you track. Somebody, I don't know where I saw listening of the Afronauts, mm-hmm. was on the internet, and I saw it, and I thought, this looks like a really well-crafted book, a really elegantly done book, and I wrote to the Christina...
Yeah, D'Amido. We just saw her this past weekend in New York City.
Oh, you did? Yes. Oh, great. All right, well, so she was so I got a book directly from her, because it wasn't on any site or anything. I didn't know her work. I didn't know her. A friend, as it turned out, she had passed through and met a friend of mine, Tilda Jensen, in Santa Fe. Mm-hmm. And so I said, oh yeah, I said, didn't see the work. I saw her and, we didn't, so and she said, oh, she's very nice and smart. And I sort of saw the book, and then I, as we do, I email Martin Parr, there's book alert, there's some, new book you should get. And he said, well, I'm in Oral at the moment, and I think she's here, so I'll ask her for a book. And it sort of took off from there, and then it was more, then it got to some of the sites and sold out immediately, and apparently is now on eBay or something for $3,000, some nonsense number.
Right, I just saw that today.
It was how you tracked it through. If you waited long enough for it to be on Photo or something, you wouldn't get the book. Mm-hmm. So there's some of those. And I'm more interested than most people. I spend more time finding interesting books because it's what I do. Mm-hmm. And also, if there's something in Europe, you find different booksellers and you try not to buy in Europe because the postage is so high to get a book here. You hope somebody will send some books to America so that you don't have to do that. But mm-hmm. all the usual suspects, let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious how you approach your own bookmaking.
How do I approach it? How does it approach me? It's more... I've been exceedingly lucky. I started at this early enough with enough intensity that I've got a degree of reputation that I have a lot of outlets to publish now. A friend of mine, when I was in Paris a couple of years ago, said I had a posse of publishers. It was like, yeah, I guess so. But different projects demand different things. Some of the sort of rules that I've developed for myself, more than set initially, but I've developed, is that each project sets the givens of what kind of book I'm going to make. My books don't tend to look alike. They're mm-hmm. not formatted the same. They have different numbers of pictures, different demands that the project instructs me mean, that's the way I photograph, too. I'm also the inverse of a conceptualist. I get a general parameter of what I'm going to work on, and then I assume that the world knows more than I do, and the pictures will educate me to what the literature is within that project. So I'm at the service of the pictures rather than the other way around. Mm-hmm. I'm not filling in the gaps of something. So I think one of the biggest sort of mysteries and sort of knowing when to stop. When is it done? It's like a painter, a really good painter, knowing when to stop on a canvas is one of the most difficult and mysterious parts of the whole thing. Mm-hmm. It's like, all right, I have enough pictures. I mean, or I have too many pictures or whatever, and what size the book should be. The Berlin book that I did, the first book, was like 436 pictures. It's a kind of project I'll never do again. I mean, it was 11 years of shooting that I kept aside mostly just for that reason. Some of the givens, like the Code book I did with Harper's Books of Harper Levine, it was really, this was the absolute inverse of it. I designed a book for Mr. Kitai, 60s Japanese pictures, and worked with this, because I'm very interested in Japanese protest books. And Harper said, well, you've done all this, why don't you do a book in Japan that'll be the companion for the Kitai book? And he said, how long will it take for you to do a book if I run a trip to Japan? And sort of arrogantly, I said, 2 weeks. Just off the top of my head, I thought, this will never happen. And it happened. And then, so they're on the plane, I'm panicked. Oh God, what if it rains for 2 weeks? And what if I blow it and everything? So I sort of fanatically, in a panic, started making pictures every possible waking moment, because I'd been too flippant about the whole thing. But, that was really confining. I had a certain amount of time in Japan. The whole given of the Code, the title and everything, was that I wasn't going to bring any great insight into Japanese culture. I'm an outsider. It's 2 weeks. It's a complex, rich, very, in some ways very ancient and very modern culture. It's way beyond my ability to understand it, probably in 2 years, not to mention, 2 weeks. So the idea is I'm photographing the Code. My Code, which is, I make John Gossage pictures wherever I go, on top of the Code of Japan. So where those two meet, pictures get made. Mm-hmm. Pictures that seem Japanese, but at the same time seem mine. So it's a collection of those, mm-hmm. and it's an admission that I have nothing to add but these pictures. Mm-hmm. So that established a given of the book. Sometimes I get the title. I did a book called The Romance Industry in Venice, and halfway through the shooting, which was again a short period of time and a commission, I got the title, because I was photographing in Marghera, the industrial area across the lagoon from Venice. I thought, yeah, what we do as photographers is we romanticize these hellholes by aestheticizing. Mm. And Paolo Constantini, who had initiated this project, who had since died, had died of cancer as a very young man. And my vision of, what my given is I'm there to find out what killed Paolo. It's impossible. It cannot be done. One little germ, one little thing eaten by one fish that Paolo then consumed in a restaurant in Venice 17 years before eventually killed him. The thing you can't track back. But that was what I was doing. I was doing a biography of Paolo in pictures and doing a disservice to him by romanticizing and aestheticizing all of this facts of horror. That made a book.
So you talked about your posse of publishers. How do you decide, which project goes to Steidl, which project do you, put out under your own imprint?
Well, part of it they decide for me. I don't run these places. Gerhard is very slow at doing books for a lot of people. With Gerhard, now I know, I've done 32-inch ruler, and I about have, looking up Ben James is, let's say, it's supposed to come out according to Amazon, in 15 days. We haven't finished designing it, we haven't printed it. it's not going to happen. But knowing with Garrett, it may take another year before we do it. I saw him in Paris, and I really want to do the book this year and everything. And I told him, look, I'll do it whenever. We just have to do it right. Because this was a book chosen for a black and white book of travels in England with Martin Parr. Martin Parr is the subject of the book, not a photographer in it. He's my surrogate. He's the ultimate photographer. But Gerard, one of his goals is to do black and white that replicates gravure. So it's going to be done in 5-color black and white. And it's going to push. I mean, with Gerhard, you have possibly the greatest photographic printer in the world now. The idea is you have this opportunity. You do a book that pushes even Gerhard technically. Mm-hmm. He's a genius, and he's this wonderful man. We were friends for a number of years before we did books together, and I have ultimate admiration for him. So that the exceedingly well printed I do with Gerhard, it doesn't have a time constraint. Mm-hmm. Aperture has done The Pond, and they've actually asked me to do a book in a series of their sort of. I don't know what the title was. They asked me if I would do a book. They kind of Masters of Photography series for students that we're going to do this year sometime. But that's their form, so they've asked me to do that. Mm-hmm. They're always wary about. I'm a bad candidate for them because they like to have the only book out by you in a year period, and it doesn't happen too often for me. Mm-hmm. Loose Strife was done partnership with Michael Abrams to do books that were sort of financially unreasonable for others to do. The Big Berlin book was the first one we did together, and it was just you can't ask people to do a 400-picture book, a big book. It just seemed I couldn't, with a straight face, tell anybody that they wouldn't lose a fortune on this. So we figured out a way to make it so Michael didn't lose money, at least. But so that's what Loose Strife does. And I do things with Super Labo in Japan, which tend to be little more zine things, small books. He wants to do something else with me. I don't have. And people ask me now to do books. I mean, it's a very, very nice position to to have people call and say, "Look, we'd like to do a book with you. Do you have anything?" I'm running out of things. I have virtually nothing left. By the way, publishers, I've got nothing left.
So recently on social media, you posed the question, what's the ideal number of pictures for a photo book to have? So I'm less interested in the answer and more interested in why you were asking that question, or what's behind that.
Well, I did a project with Alex Soth in Auckland, New Zealand. So we spent a couple of weeks together, and we talked a lot about a lot of things, obviously. And one of the things, he was of the belief that a photo book should be able to be consumed at some degree in one sitting. You should have a small enough number of photos that you go through it and, I mean, the Berlin book, obviously, it's chapters. It mandates the idea that if you try to go through it all in one sitting, you're an idiot. I mean, it just tells you. I mean, it's the way we read good literature. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was an interesting way to look at pictures. Alex and I talked back and forth about the two pros and cons of this, and I think Alec has a real point with it. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of, and I'm very interested now. I mean, one of the things that most interests me and is never discussed, as far as I know, I haven't seen it at least, is how we use photo books. I'm interested in how I use the books I own. What's the physical? What do I do with them? What do we do with these things? How many pictures? What's the effect of having a 64 picture book, not page, book? Mm. What kind of impact does that have compared to having 180? I'm working on this. Been shooting on the Guggenheim Fellowship this year on a project that I've been working on for a couple of years around America. I think it's going to be titled "The Nicknames of Citizens." That's the book title. And I have too many. I have 300 or so pictures that I like. I'm not going to do that. I wanted to do something very coherent. And I was trying to ask people, what scale of book are you most comfortable with? I was just sort of curious. One day I said, I wonder what other people think about this. Mm-hmm. You should ask. That's an easy way. Ask. And Harper came back, for one thing, right away, that so many of the most famous books that we all like have 64 pictures.
Which is interesting.
I mean, I've never done...
If that was conscious or not.
Exactly. I mean, but whether it's conscious in the making of it, it's conscious in the reaction to it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm thinking that I might like to do with this. Again, I haven't gotten to the point to finish. I still have, months of shooting to do a small book, to make it an incredibly tight edit. Like I counted, American Photographs by Walker Evans has 86 pictures. One of the books I think is the key to bookmaking. Mm-hmm. Robert Franks probably has a similar number of the Americans. I don't know the numbers. What I did discover from Harper, I sort of emailed, said, Harper, have you been counting books? He said, no, go into Par and Badger. They list how many pictures are in each book. I wasn't counting. That's annoying to count pictures. You always get it wrong. If you do it twice, you'll get the two different numbers and everything. So that's how I did the research. So it was just curious. I'm curious of how other people use their books. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the Facebook discussion really, people sort of veered off into weirdness, and as these often do. But I got a few comments that made me think about numbers.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about books that have five images in them, or even one?
One isn't a book. One's a picture. Mm-hmm. I mean, assuming it doesn't have a lot of other material around it or anything. I mean, the thing, what books do, very simply, for we in quote, art photography business, it's set a context. Mm-hmm. Set a context for a group of works. This is the conceptual, emotional, factual basis I wish you to first enter these pictures. The city of St. Louis, say, so they give you these, and at least you get a locale or something, or Columbine High School. It sets up a context, whether it's truthful or not. It asks you a way of looking at it that isn't just history of photography aesthetics. When you do a show, or you're in a... Well, one of the things that prompted me really to get exceedingly much more serious about books and shows is it was the 150th anniversary of photography at one point. I forget what year it was. I saw my own pictures in these historical surveys. I didn't like my pictures. Hmm. There'd be one picture amid, it's like, that's not what it's about. Hmm. Like, that's not really the way I want people to enter my pictures, which is mostly about authorship and style. We make pictures to be about something, and the museum world makes it about authorship and aesthetics. So it's sort of counterproductive. Books, at least you get your say. It may be taken out and made something else, and people use it differently. But, you can do a book that you call The Pond and focus people's center to the book on the few pictures in it that are about a pond by setting that context. Mm-hmm. I mean, I could have called it Bushes. It would be a different book. It'd be very uninteresting. But, that what defining it, words do define. Captions are much more definitive and specific than visuals. Mm-hmm. And book titles are captions in a broad sense of the word. So it's that, and you can also bring in literature, you can bring in writing, which I haven't really done to any great extent because I don't write that well. But, there have been texts in my books. I always, as I say, I like text for scale. Mm-hmm. Little type makes the pictures look bigger. But different authors have taken offense at that, but Jerry Badger doesn't like my description of that. But
So, all right, well, so just the last question, you were talking about, obviously Harper wasn't counting the photos in all of those books. He was referencing something.
Yeah.
And so when photographers are sending me books for the Indie Photo Book Library, I ask them to fill in all that information because I like to know all those little bits and pieces and details. And I just want to, I guess, hear your opinion how, this almost like, the Visual Studies Workshop and their amazing collection of books that are being produced. The Indie Photo Book Library is this independent collection, very niche collection of self-published photo books. And I don't know, how do you see that fitting into the whole contemporary history of the photo book?
Oh, it's incredibly valuable. I mean, the fact, what we're talking about, even today it seems like they're everywhere and they're available. Like we were talking about the early 60s stuff. People are going to look back at this and they're not going to be able to find a lot of the things they're interested in. And things are going to come to prominence later that aren't prominent now. Mm-hmm. There'll be connoisseurship changes.
Right.
And these books, they're not in a normal distribution stream. They're not collected by libraries in general. I mean, I don't even know what libraries do anymore exactly. I think they're in a degree of crisis of how they respond to things across the board.
Right.
I mean, Radius Books is a very interesting thing because they're a nonprofit, and one of the things as a nonprofit, if you're a library, you can write to them and they will send you a free book. I mean, that's part of what they consider their thing. I mean, that was indicative of so few libraries have the budgets to buy even the major publishers' photo books. So they're not getting the indie library things, and also they're not particularly structured, like they're not made in such a way that they're too delicate often to have a library life.
Mm-hmm. Or having all the teeny zines, with Hazlitt Spine on the shelf.
Oh yeah,
they get lost. And
it's it's totally invaluable. You'll be seen as a saint later in your life. There's a sainthood in this for you, and and it's not easy to do. I mean, it's like something that. It's a totally invaluable service that will be valued more and more. And we wish you no house fires. We wish you no floods. We wish you Hurricane Zeke doesn't come through. And because it's something that ultimately needs to be done. And it's a small niche but it's not small at all. Too is that it's also the only thing that you can almost get your arms around. Mm-hmm. You can't quite. It's too big for you even too. There are things you won't have too. There are things that will be produced in Milan that nobody sends to you or something that there's no way to be complete.
Right. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean it's even if you were out purchasing everything. Mm-hmm. You had a great benefactor. You had $1 million a year purchasing budget. You couldn't find them all even because that's what this does. Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure there are just like in the 60s when Ed Ruscha sent his copy to the Library of Congress, he got the rejection letter back. I'm sure that's happening to lots of photo book makers now with what they're trying to submit. Oh yeah, no, I mean there's all sorts of different problems with either they're too elaborate and big and nobody wants, everybody thinks they're going to buy $100 photo book of mine that I'm doing in 200 copies and such. I mean, a lot of those more elaborate publications, outside of friends and family, I don't know what people are thinking, about so those are, and then just they don't necessarily fall into special collections.
No, I mean, one of the defining values of the people that do your collection is a clear misunderstanding of commercial, viability. Either it's too small, it's too hard. It's people don't do it for that. Mm-hmm. I mean, broadly, which is a very interesting thing about the field. For all intents and purposes, there's no money in doing photo books for anybody. Mm-hmm. I mean, even Steidl, the photo books that make money are the exception to the rule. Most, even that do well, sell out their 2,500 copies, don't make significant enough money. It's much better that you publish something else. So everybody sort of does it because they really love it.
Mm-hmm.
There's celebrities or, some coffee table books that have pictures in it, which is not what we're talking about, not what we're interested in looking at. It's this funny field that just does it on the love of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
We feel it's important.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, let's go look at some books.
Yeah, let's look at. Yeah, I came here to look for the book. I mean, who knew you had to go through this vetting process before you were allowed to look at books?
To visit the library, you have to get
by the way, she takes your fingerprints. She wants your whole previous history, and she Googles you incessantly before you can look at the book.
We're very close to the CIA.
Yeah, exactly.
It's rubbed off on me.
Yeah, I can see them out the window. The black helicopters are circling. The guys are in the van with the smoked windows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they fly over all the time.
Yeah.
Including the space shuttle. Flew right over.
Hey, well, they knew you had the books.
Right.
Yeah.
Drive-by.
All right, over, out.
Thank you, John.